A hot and sunny day on Friday. May start a bit misty across parts of the east, and there will be some low cloud at times just flirting with some of the North Sea coasts. We'll keep a lot of cloud in northern Scotland, but it should be a brighter, warmer day across the Highlands and the Western Isles. We could get into the 20s here. Elsewhere, we're widely into the mid to high 20s, low to mid 30s across the south. 36 is possible in some places on Friday afternoon. So a hot Friday evening. Again, overnight, we'll see that mist and low cloud just drifting a bit further inland across eastern Scotland, northeast England. So it won't be as hot here on Friday or on Saturday, where that low cloud could persist. But generally, it's another hot and sunny day on Saturday. Still a bit more cloud in the far north with a little bit of light rain and drizzle. But otherwise, we'll be watching those numbers on the up once more. And again, across parts of the south, southwest Midlands into Wiltshire, down towards Dorset there, 34, 35, possibly 36 Celsius, and maybe something similar in the capital. So it's a hot weekend. The sunshine will continue for most on Sunday, but a change as this low pressure drifts northwards. We will see more cloud on Sunday. It could bring some showers next week.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, really?
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton tonight. As Boris enters a showdown with energy bosses amid calls by ex-Labour PM Gordon Brown to renationalise big firms, are Liz Truss and top ally Kwasi Kwarteng right to rule out a major windfall tax? That's my big cost of lockdown debate at 10 p.m. with my superstar panel, top Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine, Conservative commentator Dominique Samuels and author and broadcaster Amy Nicol. It's not just Brown trying to drag Britain hard to the left. The MSM are screaming at politicians like Ian Duncan Smith to demand more socialist policies as well.
Government has to make sure
But you're in government, it's your job, for God's sake.
Well, that's what they are doing. They're working out
But
on
they
the back
don't
of
know.
the 15.
So how can the country avoid a return to 70s-style socialism? Top Truss ally and a man tipped for a meaty role in her cabinet, Sir John Redwood, thinks she's the only candidate who will stand firm against the drumbeat of the MSM and wet politicians. He's live at 9:50. As he declares in his historically inaccurate BBC doc that he's ashamed of being British, is Tom Daley wrong to blame Britain's colonial past for Commonwealth homophobia?
It makes everything make complete sense, you know? It honestly makes me feel sick to be British.
Well, my Mail Online column, this has proven highly controversial today. It's been deliberately misinterpreted by the left, of course, so we're going to debate it fairly in the Media Buzz at 10:30. Shocking new stats have laid bare the extent of lawless Britain, with just 3.7% of burglaries and 4.2% of thefts resulting in charges. And what are the police doing? I'll explain in my digest next why it's time for Britain's PC police force to get back to basics. As 1,000 traumatised families prepare to sue the shuttered Tavistock clinic, I meet Sinead Watson, a detransitioned activist and former patient at Scotland's version of the Gender Identity Centre, determined to make sure it suffers the same fate. A drought is expected to be declared across parts of Britain tomorrow, the likes of which we haven't seen since 2018. That doesn't quite fit the narrative, does it? Debating whether ex-Boris ally Lord Frost is right to say we are not in a climate emergency. Repeat, not in a climate emergency. Worth upending our lives for. Social commentator Adrian Hayes, energy researcher and economist Laurie Leyburn, and Animal Rebellion's Orla Coughlin go head-to-head. I'll get your views too. That's in The Clash. Scheming Sturgeon used a scarcely attended Fringe event to mock Truss, but will she be laughing after her Indie Ref 2 plans was branded not legally competent? Political firebrand Anne Widdecombe explores whether Nicola's independence dream is already dead. That's at 9:40. And the shine could be coming off Jacinda Ardern as the world wakes up to her COVID tyranny. Remember this?
You can trust us as a source of that information. Otherwise, dismiss anything else. We will continue to be your single source of truth.
Has New Zealand now come to regret its zero COVID obsession? Dr. J. Bhattacharya, co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration, analyses an uncancelled at 10:40. And why has Mark Drakeford been banned from one of the biggest attractions in Wales? I'll reveal all as I crowd my final Greatest Britain and Union Jackass of the Week at 10:50. Tomorrow's newspapers hot off the press throughout the show too. This is Dan Wootton Tonight. Let's go. Just one thing first, though. I've long been warning of the health risks of a plant-based diet. Meat's good for us. We're meant to eat at least a bit of it, or in my case, actually a lot of it. Vegans, on the whole, very lovely people, but in my personal experience, those that I know in my own life seem to faint all the time. And now more proof from a major new University of Leeds study revealing women who don't eat meat are much more likely to break their hips later in life because they lack the nutrients for good bone and muscle health. Now, this was a study of 26,000 women over the course of 20 years, so it's serious stuff. So look, ditch this beyond rubbish. Go for the Big Mac. Your hips will thank you for it in a couple of decades' time. We're going to be having some red meat discussions on crime, politics and patriotism tonight with this trio of carnivores on my superstar panel. Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine, political commentator Dominique Samuels and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole. Amy, is it true that you're a flexitarian? That's the rumour.
How do you know these things about me? Yeah, I would say that's an accurate description.
Thought so.
And my hips are absolutely fine.
So virtue signalling even with their choice of diet. But anyway, before all of that, the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Dan. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. Energy companies have agreed to do more to help struggling families after the Prime Minister urged them to act in the national interest. The talks follow a dire warning, with one consultancy firm forecasting that the cap on energy bills could reach £5,000 next year. Despite the plea from Boris Johnson, there's been no announcements of any immediate help. Liz Truss is promising to make sure energy companies are held to account, but says profit should not be treated as a dirty word. Speaking in Cheltenham at the biggest hustings of the contest so far, the Foreign Secretary said the energy giants need to be rigorously held to account.
Make sure we're using our reserves in the North Sea and incentivising companies to do that. We need to make sure we're fracking in parts of the country where there is local support for that taking place. As Prime Minister, I would make sure I am working with the energy companies to get that supply on as quickly as possible.
Well, the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, appeared to criticise Liz Truss's plans to deal with the cost of living crisis at that event, saying it would make the economy worse.
I will not do is pursue policies that risk making inflation far worse and last far longer, especially if those policies seem to amount to borrowing £50 billion and putting it on the country's credit card and asking our kids and our grandkids to pick up the tab.
In other news, 20 Albanian criminals have been deported back to their home country. Some of those on the removal flight chartered by the Home Office had been convicted of drug and weapons offences. It brings the total number of Albanian criminals removed from the UK in the past year to 1,000, including some who crossed the English Channel illegally. Home Secretary Priti Patel says the government will stop at nothing to remove those with no right to be here. The number of Ukrainian families that are now homeless or at risk of becoming so after arriving in England has doubled in the last 2 months. Officials believe more than 1,300 Ukrainian households are affected after arriving under the Family and Homes for Ukraine schemes. Hundreds of placements have fallen through due to relationships with sponsors breaking down or accommodation being unsuitable or unavailable. There's fears that more families could be affected as their initial 6-month placements come to an end. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now back to Dan Wootton tonight.
We all know these streets are becoming more lawless and the threat of crime darkening our own lives feels more real than ever before. Most of us have also realised that given the dire circumstances, the increasingly woke police have got their priorities oh so wrong.
I posted something that he posted. You come to arrest me, you don't arrest him. Why has he come to this one?
Well, look, I actually have huge respect for the police on the whole. Many of my family members have worked for them and I'm well aware of the pressures they are under. But I also know what it's like to be a crime victim in modern Britain. 3 times now, I've been mugged in Sadiq Khan's lawless London. Look, I'm a big bloke. I wasn't under the threat of violence. The hood rats just wanted my phone. But I felt a pure rage running through me, along with a feeling of violation and a helplessness, to be honest. And that helplessness largely comes from the cruel reality that in modern Britain, the chances of you getting your crime solved are close to non-existent. And this has been backed up today by a damning new report from Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary that concludes burglary victims are being let down by the police, with officers missing opportunities to catch suspects from the moment crimes are reported. Figures from the Home Office reveal that just 3.7% of burglaries, 4.2% of thefts and 6.6% of robberies result in a charge. So I fully support the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, Andy Cook, who made headlines today by saying these are not minor crimes and they strike at the heart of how safe people feel in their own homes and communities.
They do need to focus on issues that matter to the community, and burglary, robbery and theft from vehicles very much is an issue that matters to communities. It strikes at the heart of communities and makes people feel unsafe in their own homes and in their own neighbourhoods. So these are the issues that we need to focus on. Policing is complex. The demand on policing is complex. I accept that. But we also need to remember the people who have been becoming victims of crime in relation to the more traditional issues as well, that people do want to see policing take action on.
Cook has now ordered a back-to-basics approach, including visiting the victims of burglary in person and correct crime scene management practice. I fully endorse that. Stop investigating tweets by Lawrence Fox and start investigating CCTV of muggings. Stop dancing with the Extinction Rebellion eco-terrorists and start infiltrating the dangerous environmental organisations planning waves of crime from October. Stop spending money on painting rainbows over cop cars and start spending it on solving burglaries instead. To respond now, my superstar panel, Star Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine, the political commentator Dominique Samuels and the author and broadcaster Amy Nichol. Sarah Vine, it's just so despicable, isn't it, that the tiny percentage of those types of crimes now solved?
I mean, I think the police are in a real state, actually. That, you know, they seem to spend all their time worrying about thought crime and not worrying about actual crime.
Yep.
And
it's easier to solve, I guess.
Tied themselves in so many knots, but it's always low-hanging fruit with them. Yeah. It's the easiest stuff that's going to get the most traction and make them, you know, they're so terribly worried about their image. And the thing is, they do have a massive image problem. If you look at Sarah Everard, if you look at the policeman whose names I forget, who took pictures of those two poor girls who were killed, I mean, there are some really bad eggs rattling around in that basket. I'm not sure that's the right metaphor, but you know what I mean. So they're always trying to run. They're running to try and catch up with themselves, but they're not actually doing the job that they're asked to do. I mean, the other problem, of course, they have is that actually, if they do start arresting people, the criminal court system is so backed up and so constipated, and the judicial system in this country is so paralysed, and our prisons are all full. So, you know, there is a broader question here about, you know, general how we manage our criminal problem in this country, because we don't have enough space in jails and we don't have enough time in court to process people. But I do think that this idea that, you know, if you get your mobile phone stolen, it's not considered really to be a crime by the police because it's a disposable object, your insurance will pay for it, they don't want to... Yeah, they can't be bothered, it's not for them, it's not a thing. But things like antisocial behaviour and knife crime, which are really terrible, I mean, they're also very bad on that. They don't seem to be able to get a grip on that. And they seem to have completely lost the war against drugs. I mean, completely. Yeah. As far as I can tell.
I mean, Dominique, 3.7% of burglaries. I mean, let's just think for a moment. That means your home is invaded by complete strangers, and there is a 96% chance that the criminals are going to get off. And obviously that's why this industry is just growing.
I mean, yes, there is a crisis in policing at the moment, but when you actually look into some of the details of this, it's sort of not surprising. I mean, one statistic says that inexperienced officers are going to make up 40% of the UK police force by next year. Part of that is to do with the fact that the Conservative Party have had to actually regain some of the 20,000 officers that they got rid of, and much of those officers are inexperienced. But on the other hand, you've got a lot of these officers actually coming fresh out of university. They don't really know the realities of policing. They're scared to communicate with the public. One report even said that they had their parents calling in, demanding that they have their birthdays off. Seriously. We have a crisis.
Yeah, this is the woke world, isn't it? And the problem is, as Sarah says, because they have this image problem, that's why sometimes they think the solution is going woke.
But we don't want social workers in uniforms. No. We don't want thought police in uniforms. We want police officers that are actually interested in solving crime. And I think a lot of it is to do with the bureaucracy that, I'm sorry, the Conservative government has allowed to accumulate on their watch. It's on their watch that they've turned into thought police and social workers. how about have a look at the College of Policing and the undue influence that they seem to be having on policing, because that's where a lot of the woke nonsense is actually coming from.
However, the woke nonsense does have a position as well, because you need to ensure that you've got faith in the police, that you've got trust in the police. That's really important in communities.
Well, I'll have faith in police
that's
and
why...
trust in the police if my home is burgled and they actually bother to come to my address.
Instead of investigating tweets.
But, OK, I want them to investigate tweets and also to come around your house. And unfortunately, there aren't the numbers available at the moment. There's not enough police and there's not enough funding.
Honestly, Amy, if they had to investigate tweets, I mean, I get multiple death threats a week. I mean, seriously.
Love it if the police had enough time and energy to
But they
go
don't.
to each of those. But they should, and that's why it's it's an issue of prioritisation and retention.
They shouldn't be prioritising tweets.
Of course they shouldn't. But at the moment, they're prioritising 999 calls over 101 calls. All the things you've talked about, burglary, theft, the smaller crimes, they would be considered 101 calls. But because they're so stretched, there aren't enough police on the ground and there isn't enough money.
So what are they calling for tweets and hate crime?
Why, that's not a priority. Each force obviously has different abilities, and if you look at a really well-funded, well-running police force, then they've probably got the time and the finances to be able to look into something like a tweet.
Do you even believe in the police, though, Amy? Because you don't believe in prison, do you?
I don't believe in harsh law and order. We've got to throw everyone in prison and that will sort everything out. I don't think that at all, and I think probably the rising crime comes from a loss of community, and if you had more sense of community, such things as like youth clubs, social services.
Youth clubs is going to solve it all.
I think youth clubs.
It's always the left's answer. We'll put some youth clubs up.
That's a really naive.
That's
a really naive way to look at it, because in fact, giving people purpose and having stuff to do within their community and a sense of respect and value for their community, of course, that starts at the roots.
But I think the government has sort of got it wrong on two fronts. On the one hand, you've gotten rid of obviously the sure start centres, the youth clubs, etc., etc. But then on the other hand, in the actual prisons, you don't have enough prison staff to actually run the prisons. So the prisoners are literally having parties in there, taking pics, taking drugs, cooking steak. It's a party. No wonder a lot of them actually want to come back
there. And as Sarah says, the problem is because of the pandemic, the justice system is so bogged down as well. But the thing is, Sarah, this is Britain. We cannot get to the point where we accept that a burglary, an invasion of one's home, is no longer a priority crime. It is a priority crime, and it should be.
And it should be, and it should be. Of course, it should be attended. But like I said, they tend to focus on the low-hanging fruit, so they will.
That's not true. They focus on the 999 emergencies.
Well, I don't know. I mean.
Well, I'm sorry, we saw the police showing up to the house of an army veteran who'd retweeted a post by Lawrence Fox, and there were about six police officers.
That whole story was so blown out.
Also, so much of what they do is to do with box ticking and filling in forms. I mean, the amount of
bureaucracy,
stupid paperwork that policemen have to do. Most policemen,
exactly, and then they want to leave as a result.
And most policemen are really good people, and it's a really difficult job, and they deserve to be properly paid, and they deserve to not have to do all this nonsense filling in of forms and stuff. They deserve to be properly supported,
and properly trained,
and they're not.
And properly trained. Maybe send the new ones that you've got that are from uni and don't know what they're doing. Maybe send them to a boot camp, some groups of them, and actually show them quickly what to do.
There's a brilliant channel. There's a brilliant Channel 4 series on at the moment about young cops in Brighton, and it follows the lives of 3 or 4 really young coppers, and it's really worth your listeners checking it out, because it really is an eye opener.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it's called.
Night Coppers.
I'll look it up.
Night Coppers.
Is it Night Coppers? That's it. Have you watched it?
No, I haven't.
Have you got a thing in your ear telling you?
I
want a thing in my ear.
But yeah, just one last thing I would say, though, just to reiterate, I think we should stop focusing on uni grads for police officers as well. I think that
let's get
people
that
have real life experience, because uni grads,
it's a perfect job.
It's a perfect job.
It's a perfect job for somebody, for a young man or a young woman who's slightly gone off the rails, who really understands a bit, how things work.
I think the fact is that austerity completely wiped out a massive amount of police officers, and we've never really come back from that. And every time we try to replace the officers that were sacked, they don't have the experience, so they're not. There's a massive shortage of senior officers, and I think that's
to get rid of those police officers. I agree.
And it all stems from
Amy Nicole, Dominic, Sarah Vine, thank you so much. coming up as scheming Sturgeon's Indie Ref 2 dream over before it's even begun, after the Supreme Court is told her plans are not legally competent. Political firebrand Anne Widdecombe joins me on that at 9:40. But up next, is Lord Frost correct that we are not in a climate emergency worth upending society for? Social commentator Adrian Hayes, energy researcher and economist Laurie Leyburn, and animal rebellions Orla Coughlin battle it out in the clash as ever. I want to know what you think. Email me Dan at gbnews.uk. Tweet me using the handle at GBNews. Our poll running there too. The results after the break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Anne Widdecombe and Sir John Redwood are still to come this hour, but first it's time for the clash. The media and eco-doom mongers are up in arms about the looming drought expected to be declared across parts of Britain tomorrow. But often buried is the fact that droughts are relatively common weather events that have been occurring for decades. According to the Environment Agency, severe droughts were recorded as far back as the 1930s and 20s and even the 1880s. Our last was declared pretty much on schedule in 2018. We survived that and we will do again. Thankfully, not everyone has bought into this eco-friendly version of Project Fear. Former Brexit Minister and Liz Truss backer Lord Frost has bravely spoken out against the borderline hysterical sense of emergency attached to climate concerns. In a new essay for the Policy Exchange think tank urging the UK to ditch renewable energy, Frost said, "The current evidence does not support the assertion that we are in a climate emergency. Rather, the effects of climate change are a problem, one of the many we face, and should be tackled in that pragmatic way rather than by asking us to upend the whole way our societies work." Hear, hear. Now, let me be clear. Neither Frost nor I deny that climate change is real, but the highly respected pair is right to say that we should not be hectoring people to the point it, quote, seems normal to be lectured about the moral aspects of virtually every choice in our everyday lives. So, what do you think? Is Lord Frost right to say we are not in a climate emergency? Email me, Dan at gbnews.uk. Tweet me at gbnews. Our poll running there too. The results shortly. But to give their take and to help you make up your mind, I'm joined by the economist and energy researcher Laurie Leyburn, spokesperson for Animal Rebellion Orla Coughlin, and author and social commentator Adrian Hayes. Adrian, you are with Lord Frost on this, I believe.
Good evening, Dan, and good evening, everybody. Yes, I am. And I'll say right from the start that more than perhaps anybody else in this country or many in the world, I've actually witnessed climate change firsthand, walking to the North Pole where the ice was 1 metre thick a few years ago, used to be 5 metres thick, crossing the length of Greenland, where we work with Denmark's senior ice scientists. And so I've witnessed it. It's happening. Global warming's happening. Man-made or natural causes, I think the jury's out. Personally, I think it's a bit of both. Is it natural, the present to droughts and everything part of the climate change? Possibly. The modeling's where I'm a little bit suspicious about, because as we've seen in other factors, modelling can be well out. But putting that all aside, it's happening. And we've got, like we insure our house, we put alarms, we put locks, we put security. I do believe to start with, we have to do something about climate change. So I'm with Orla and Laurie to start with on that.
Orla, the issue is not so much that we have to do something, it's about the pace, isn't it? And Lord Frost says, hang on a moment, this isn't an emergency.
Thanks for having me on the show, Dan. It absolutely is an emergency, and I'd like to say, like, my background is not a scientist. I'm a nurse, specifically a children's nurse, and I'd like to say that I think the general public can understand that we are in a crisis. All we have to do is look towards the most recent IPCC report, and for context, the IPCC report is 234 scientists, the top scientists of different countries around the world, coming together and looking at 14,000 different studies. It's not one study, it's not a couple of studies. And as you said, you think that the jury's out on this, but this IPCC report has said very clearly that this is a code red for humanity.
I know,
David King,
I mean, look, I'm a bit older than you, but in reality, Orla, for my entire life, the UN have been issuing these doomsday warnings. They started in the 70s. It continued when I was growing up in the 80s about the ozone hole, which is now, by the way, pretty much closed. Is it not a bit, Orla, like the Great Barrier Reef? It's going to be destroyed. And actually, when people dig down and actually look at the evidence, it's in better shape than it has been for 30 years.
Well, this is what I'm saying. This is 14,000 scientific studies that have accumulated together. It's not just one study, it's not two studies, it's not one thing. This is 14,000 studies that are saying that it is a code red for humanity, that we need to find solutions urgently. And Sir David King, who's the ex-chief scientific advisor of the UK, has said last year that we have 3 to 4 years to determine the future of humanity. That's this year, 2 to 3 years.
And I've been saying that for the past 30 or 40 years. That's the reality. Laurie, you are not with Lord Frost on this.
No, and can I just say that to take some of the points that have just been discussed, there is a graph in the latest IPCC report that shows that it is a result of human activity. I mean, the science is now so advanced now that we can actually identify that it is almost exclusively a result of human activity that we're facing this global temperature rise. That question is now closed. It's done. We are very advanced with the science here. The second thing to say is that the IPCC is slightly separate to what you're calling the UN there, right? This is a report, a body that brings together the best available science, as we were just hearing, okay? If you look at those reports, they have been very guarded in their language. Some people say, in fact, too guarded in their language. That is separate to what some people in the UN have been saying. But we have now, as we've just been hearing, got to the point where those highly detailed reports that show the very best of the science are saying we are at the point where it might be proportionate to be thinking about this in the terms that you could apply words like emergency to. And we're seeing that all around us, right? It's not just heat waves and fires, which are now more extreme than they have ever been in many places. It's the threats to the things that are really important in our lives, like food supply, like the ability to work outdoors and other things that are being impacted by this in a way that we have not seen before in the available record of our weather and how the climate has changed.
Far fewer people, by the way, are dying now from weather events than ever have. I think one thing that's really dangerous, Laurie, is to say on any issue, by the way, on any issue, and I especially say this after the 2 years that we've just lived through and all the lies that we've been told about the COVID and the vaccine, the science is never closed, okay? You should never just say the science is closed. Science is never closed. And it almost feels quite zealot-like for you to say that, because surely you want to keep investigating, you want to keep researching. That's the point of science.
Yeah. Yeah, and I strongly agree with that. I don't think there ever will be. I agree. The science should never be described as
closed.
No, I said there is one question, which is this caused by humans, that is largely closed. In the same way that if you went out and you smoked 100 cigarettes a day for your entire life, and then you got lung cancer, the science that we have will make a link between that smoking activity and then the illness that you have then got, right?
Yeah.
So
but
there are certain questions.
The question is, from Lord Frost, though, is actually not questioning that point about whether the climate is changing. It's about whether we're in an emergency, whether ordinary folk should have to give up eating meat, should have to give up flying. Because, Orla, that's what your group wants, right? The Animal Rebellion. Can we just be clear about this? You think that there should be no farming of animals in the UK, no consumption of meat, right? No foreign travel on planes whatsoever.
Yeah, so we're a group that are campaigning towards a plant-based future, and our demands are that the government support farmers and the fishing communities in transitioning to a plant-based food system. And in doing that, we're also asking the government that they will rewild all of the freed up land that will come from this plant-based future, and that we will have a bigger program of wildlife restoration and ultimately carbon
drawdown. Have you seen the study
drawdown.
today, by the way, Orla, that I spoke about at the top of the show? It's a Leeds University study over the past 20 years of 26,000 women, showing that they're far more likely to have serious hip breaks later in life if they're on a plant-based diet. Do you have any evidence that an all plant-based diet is actually safe for humans?
Absolutely. The World Health Organization has said that a plant-based diet is healthy for all stages of life.
Oh, well, if
And
they
we also
say
know
it,
that
I certainly don't believe it.
Well, I'm not finished. Sorry, I'm not finished. And we also know that a plant-based diet is reducing heart attacks, it's reducing stroke, and it's a massive reduction to obesity.
Okay.
So, and heart attack is the leading cause of people.
Adrian Hayes, you've obviously listened to all of that. What do you want to come back on?
Firstly, I don't lorry with respect. The science is never settled. I'd say that. There is a big volume of scientists who don't disagree with this, but they've been cancelled. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think we need to redefine the English language. What is an emergency and a crisis, a catastrophe? Yeah. I've seen global warming. Yes, I agree with. Climate change, yes. But climate crisis, climate emergency, climate catastrophe means it's happening imminently. I believe we got time. But the biggest thing, and this is where I really do stress, the problem when you we face many risks in the world, from asteroid collision to nuclear war to food resources to population. When you obsess on one single risk, and when you look at one single issue within that risk, carbon dioxide, a life-giving gas, and when you look at one solution, net zero, you're in danger economic impacts, which we know very well about this year, society impacts, but also, this is why I really stress, environmental impacts. I'm personally far less worried about carbon dioxide emissions in the air as I'm with nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, lead pollution, all these other pollutants that are killing 5 to 10 million people today. I'm more worried about the pesticides and chemicals that big food corporations put in our food, leaking into our rivers, that water companies, raw sewage putting into our rivers, killing all wildlife, what chemical companies are putting into our lakes, our oceans, our rivers, our seas, our plastics going in the ocean, our resource depletion to pay for all of our data requirements, to pay for our EVs, to pay for our windmill blades, resource depletion, deforestation, farmlands, 3 billion plastic masts in the ocean, overfishing with mass trawlers with spotter planes, just decimating all these fish things. These are bigger problems, and none of these were caused by climate change. These are caused by humans. And yet I don't see Extinction Rebellion protesting on the streets of Jakarta about deforestation. I don't see animal welfare rights lobbyists protesting about all the chemicals in our food and pesticides. Now, I don't see any of these protests taking place. These are the real crises that I believe we need to solve. And this is far more important than climate change, where we've got many decades to resolve.
Lots of great points there, absolutely. And Orla, I guess that's something that I really want to second from Adrian and get you to pick up on. For me, it's the language. I mean, you might be surprised to know, Orla, I'm an environmentalist. I've been an environmentalist since the 80s. I grew up in New Zealand. But because of the way that I was terrorised, actually, as a child by folk like you who were telling me that I wasn't going to be around in 20 years' time because of the ozone hole. I'm incredibly angry with the rhetoric that you use. And it is wanting to terrify kids. And you use very basic weather events, like at the moment, 3 days of hot weather, essentially, to say that we're in an emergency. And as Adrian says, Orla, we do have time. We are heading towards net zero, but we have to do it responsibly, because if we don't, Orla, the economic catastrophe for this country will actually cause far more deaths than climate change.
I'd just like to say, that we agree on so much, Adrian, and Dan as well. All of us here agree on so much that we need to look after nature, that we need,
exactly.
these
It's about the
massive,
language. It's about the language, and that's what this debate is about, because Lord Frost says we're not in an emergency. Stop being irresponsible. That's what we're disagreeing on, Orla.
Well, we can have all of these wider issues and still be in an emergency. And these issues are so interconnected. And that's why we see that if we transition to a plant-based food system, we can rewild the UK. We can bring back these fires.
By the way, Orla, I don't agree with you on that. I'm a great carnivore.
That's what the science,
I love
what the science
meat.
from Oxford is saying.
So I don't care what they're saying. Nothing is going to stop me eating meat for as long as I live. Final word to you, Laurie.
The US military, which we cannot accuse of being a socialist organisation, describes the climate crisis as a threat multiplier. It makes the greatest threats to our shared security, to our well-being as a nation, and to the US and other countries around the world. It makes those countries less secure. It does that because when the temperature gets higher and higher, things start to impact how we grow food. They start to impact how people move around the world. They start to cause all of these additional problems. It saturates everything. The stuff that we've seen recently, right, is extraordinary. We had the Met Office, again, not a hive of socialists who are plotting certain things, quite nerdy scientists. No, they don't, because these guys are the holders of an amazing body of British science that we should be hugely proud of.
I want them to tell me the weather. I don't want them to terrify me or preach to me. That's not their job.
Well, what they did the other day is they did a weather forecast of what it could look like in 2050 if we didn't get on top of the climate crisis, right? It was speculative,
but we
right?
are getting on top of it.
Very open about it. And then, actually, the kind of weather they forecast happened the other week. And that was extraordinary. And that is an example of these kind of the multiplier of threats that the climate crisis is bringing to us.
But we also had that in 1976 too. And that's that's not to dismiss that things are changing, but I think we can't use every individual freak weather event to declare an emergency. But fascinating, very respectful debate. Thank you all for having it. That was the economist and energy researcher Laurie Layburn, spokesperson for Animal Rebellion Orla Coughlin, and author and social commentator Adrian Hayes. Thank you all. So who do you agree with? Is Lord Frost right that we are not in a climate emergency? From Kojak, Lord Frost is absolutely spot on. There is no climate emergency and no such thing as man-made climate change, but there is an exponential amount of climate alarmism. From Paul, it amazes me these people can vote. Lord Frost is a man nearing retirement age and can decide on my future, yet I can't. And from Sean, Lord Frost is bang on. The world is not ending. We've had a good summer. It's too hot for me, though, I have to be honest. Your verdict now in. 84% of you agree with Lord Frost, say we're not in a climate emergency. 16% of you with the Animal Rebellion. Coming up, how does the country avoid renationalisation of industries and a return to the socialism of the 70s? Sir John Redwood, who's tipped for a meaty role in a Liz Truss cabinet, says she's the only one who can stand up to the drumbeat of the MSM and mainstream politicians. He joins me live at 9:50. But first, as Horrendous Ref 2 plans are declared not legally competent, is the independence dream over for scheming sturgeon, political firebrand Anne Widdecombe analyses next.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So John Redwood and tomorrow's newspaper front page is coming up, and now it's time for political firebrand and former Conservative Minister Anne Widdecombe. Now, I was delighted yesterday to see the Edinburgh Fringe Festival take heed of this advice from Liz Truss.
And I think the best thing to do with Nicola Sturgeon is ignore her. I think she's... I'm sorry, she's an attention seeker, Seb. That's what she is.
Speaking to an audience that was reportedly half empty, Sturgeon threw a host of cheap shots at Truss during her sit-down with LBC's Ian Dale at Edinburgh's Pentland Theatre, including a claim that all the leadership frontrunners had asked her at this year's COP26 was how to get into Vogue, a feat that woke darling Nicola has somehow managed twice. Oh, look at all of those empty seats. Love to see it. In my eyes, you know, Sturgeon is better at generating PR than governing, as evidenced by the latest blow to her IndyRef2 delusion. Writing to the Supreme Court on behalf of the UK government, Advocate General for Scotland Lord Stewart savagely stated a bill legislating for a referendum on independence would be outside the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament. The written submission, published on Wednesday, also argued the court has no jurisdiction to declare the legality of IndyRef2, and even if it does rule in Sturgeon's favour, Holyrood would be unable to hold a lawful referendum. He also disputed Scotland's claim that any vote would be merely advisory. So has the curtain already fallen on Sturgeon's independence dream? Let me bring in political firebrand, former Tory Minister Anne Widdecombe now. Anne, your reaction?
Well, first of all, it's not telling us anything that we didn't already know. I mean, we've known for a very long time that unless the government at Westminster actually sanctioned a referendum, it wasn't going to be law. And Nicola Sturgeon has known that for as long as all the rest of us have known it. But it doesn't suit her agenda. So she puts her head in the sand and she pretends that it's a referendum and that it's going to be legally binding. Well, of course, it isn't. I mean, it's just a complete waste of everybody's time. And she ought to get on with addressing something such as the terrible state of education in Scotland. I mean, look at the latest A-level results. You know, it's declined. Achievement has declined in Scotland on her watch, under her leadership. It's declined, and it's not the only thing that's declined in Scotland, and that is what she should be focused on, not some completely unnecessary referendum when we only had one a few years ago, which everybody said was going to be binding for a generation. Well, I don't know how Nicola Sturgeon defines a generation.
What did you think of her getting her claws out, Anne, and making that bitchy little jibe at Liz Truss over Vogue magazine? Not very professional.
Well, I mean, it was hardly a telling jibe, was it? I mean, it says more about Nicola than it does about Liz. But to me, that's just something trivial, unless she can actually come up with a serious argument for the referendum, the legality thereof. Frankly, she should just get on with the job of governing. Never mind the Tory leadership. She should get on with the job of governing. That is her job.
And do you think maybe the Sturgeon momentum has slowed somewhat? Because that was very shocking for me to see the Edinburgh Festival. I mean, this is Sturgeon heartland, and hundreds of empty seats for her big night.
Well, I mean, who wants to listen to Nicola Sturgeon? I mean, that's the question you've got to ask. Why would you come out? Why would you pay money? Why would you give up your time to listen to her when at the moment she has nothing to say? At least that is nothing to say that is remotely sustainable. So I can quite understand that there are loads and loads of empty seats. But your question was, is her momentum dropping off? I think that has been happening for quite some time because if you just actually look at the way election results go, I mean, yes, the SNP are still in a dominant position, but it's being weakened almost every time. And I think people are now just getting a bit fed up.
And can I just ask for a quick word on the breaking news today regarding the meeting between Boris Johnson and the energy companies? Of course, there is lots of pressure now being put on the Prime Minister to do something. Personally, my feeling is that he has done what's needed to take us up until the cap change in October, the price cap change in October.
Yeah.
And he is a caretaker Prime Minister. We're in the middle of August. Is this just political posturing, or actually is there something more that Boris Johnson should be doing right now, in your view?
Well, first of all, Boris Johnson is still Prime Minister and we do still have a government. And even in the middle of a general election, you still have a government. And when we've got something of this order of magnitude confronting us, it is quite right, that Boris is carrying on as not only as PM, but carrying on with the functions of a Prime Minister as well. So I don't have a problem with the fact that he's talking to the energy companies. What I have a big problem with, you've heard me say this before, there is one very obvious solution. We're out of the EU, for heaven's sake. We could take VAT off energy bills. We're entitled to do that now, which we weren't entitled to do before. Why is there any delay at all in doing that?
But Truss wouldn't even commit to it at our brilliant GB News People's Forum yesterday evening. She still wouldn't commit to it.
I know. And, the more I listen to her campaigning, the more questions I have. But no, she wouldn't commit to it. And that is exactly what we should have said. I mean, even before the energy crisis started to bite, we should have said, yippee, we're free, we're in charge of our taxes, no more VAT on something as essential as fuel. That's what we should have said.
So right. Anne Widdecombe, thank you so much, Anne. We will speak next week. But coming up, are Liz Truss and top ally Kwasi Kwarteng right to rule out a major windfall tax on energy companies amid the cost of living crisis? My superstar panel will debate in the Media Buzz and take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers at 10 p.m. too. But first, can the MSM and mainstream politicians be stopped from dragging Britain back into 70s-style socialism? Sir John Redwood, who's tipped for a big job in the Truss cabinet, joins me to discuss.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Time now on the latest on the battle to be PM. And Gordon Brown has made another unwelcome political intervention by urging the government to temporarily renationalise energy companies that failed to cut customer bills this weekend. The former PM, filling the void left by Sunderland Starmer, took to The Guardian, of course, to demand more government handouts, as well as another windfall tax on electricity and gas. In fact, the entire MSM and political establishment are capitalising on the cost of lockdown and energy crises to push for socialist policies like mass renationalisation of industries. But as the political climate veers towards the hard left, it's essential the next government, led most likely by Truss, drowns out the socialist drumbeat and delivers a low-tax, small-state, Thatcher-style revolution. One man who's maybe even tipped to get back into the cabinet under Truss, helping to lead the revolution back to the right, is renowned former minister under Thatcher, Sir John Redwood, and I'm delighted to say he joins me now. So, John, is Truss, who obviously you have endorsed, is she the only candidate who can stop the country's death march back to socialism?
Well, of course, because she is the one who has come out top of the race so far with the members, if you believe the polling. She's the one who can now be Prime Minister, and we need a good Conservative Prime Minister, full of common sense Conservative values, who can support all those who work hard, who make this country what it can be, and seize off this dreadful threat. And Gordon Brown, I remember him nationalising RBS. He paid far too much for the shares, and we've lost a fortune on them. And how did that help get us through the crisis which he had helped deliver with the central bank and the other finance ministers of the world at that time?
There are obviously, though, these incoming headwinds, John. You know, the analysts today saying potentially energy bills could hit £5,000 next year. So how should Truss deal with this increasing pressure to commit to further handouts?
Well, we first of all got to have realistic numbers. I think some of the numbers now are scaring people needlessly. We then need to make sure we can get more energy out of the ground and more domestically supplied energy available. Because if something is too dear, you need more supply. You don't need more taxes to make it even dearer. And then we need to ensure that the economy can recover and that it doesn't go into recession in the way that the Bank of England seems to think it's doing, so that people have reasonable incomes from their employment to be able to pay their bills.
I mean, John, she is going to have, and for want of a better phrase, and I'm sorry because you're a very dignified man, but she is going to have some big balls, isn't she? She is going to have to be strong. She's going to have to be tough. She's going to have to stare down the establishment. She's going to have to stare down the Blob. She's going to have to stare down the MSM and the BBC. Why do you think she is the person who can do that? What it is about her personal characteristics? Because obviously you know her well.
Well, I backed her at the beginning of this campaign because I'd seen what she was doing in government. And I was particularly swayed by the way she handled the huge problems we got in having proper trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And she was handed this very difficult problem by the Prime Minister. Others had not been able to find their way through it. She listened to sensible advice and she then produced the piece of legislation which has now been through the House of Commons, which would help resolve that issue unilaterally, given the refusal of the EU to make sensible proposals or to agree sensible proposals with ourselves. And at the time, she had to battle against the Chancellor and against other senior ministers, and she had to make sure that the government was fully supported in this wish by the Prime Minister. And it just showed to me that she had courage, she had conviction, and she had the ability to get things done.
Obviously, we have seen, John, a month of really severe blue-on-blue attacks. How difficult is it going to be for the party to unite after September the 5th? I mean, you've got the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, who is supporting the Sunak campaign, saying that Liz Truss's policies are electoral suicide.
Well, I hope Dom will rethink that as and when Liz wins, as I trust she will. I think it should be possible for most of us to come together quite quickly, because most of us understand this is an election campaign amongst Conservatives, that there are different visions or views of how a Conservative government can best behave, but surely we are all agreed that any Conservative alternative is an awful lot better than what the parties of the left would be offering our country. So I hope that under Liz's leadership, we'll unite pretty quickly, that there will be a good emergency budget that people can get behind, because it would be a budget, I trust, for growth, for expansion, for offering sensible help to people, above all for promoting more employment so that people can have better incomes from employment. And that should be something which brings the party together.
Lots of comparisons to Margaret Thatcher. What do you make of them?
Well, I think today is today, and Liz Truss will be Liz Truss, and she has many great strengths. I certainly see some of Margaret Thatcher in her, in particular in the way, as I said, she's handled the Northern Ireland Protocol, and before that, the way she got a rather reluctant Whitehall to do free trade deals around the world when many of the establishment thought they couldn't be done or were undesirable. And I'm sure she can go on to achieve great things as Prime Minister. But she will be her own woman, and these are different times. We have different battles to fight today than Margaret had to fight in the 1980s.
John, lots of speculation, of course, that you might be offered a role in her team. Would you be prepared to serve if asked?
Well, I've always said that I've got no insight into that. There have been no deals. I've given my support unconditionally to Liz Truss for leader, and she will choose the team she wants around her as and when she is Prime Minister. And I've also said that if she wants me to do something, and I think it's something I could do, and that it would be mutually sensible, then of course I will do it.
Well, it'd be great to have you back. Sir John Redwood, we will keep in touch. Thank you so much. It's 10 p.m. I'm Dan Wootton. Tonight, as Boris Johnson's showdown with energy bosses fails to solve soaring bills, which could top £5,000 by spring, are Liz Truss and top ally Kwasi Kwarteng right to shoot down socialist solutions like a major windfall tax on the industry? My superstar panel give their view in the Media Buzz next. Tonight, I'm joined by Star Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine, political commentator Dominique Samuels, and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole. Olympic diver Tom Daley plunged to new depths during his historically inaccurate new BBC documentary.
It makes everything make complete sense, you know? It honestly makes me feel sick to be British.
So is he wrong to blame Britain's colonial past for homophobia in Commonwealth countries today? We'll debate Tom's woke and ill-informed British bashing at 10:30. As 1,000 traumatised families get ready to sue the shuttered Tavistock Clinic, I meet Sinead Watson, a detransitioned activist and former patient at Scotland's version of the Gender Identity Centre, determined to make sure it suffers the same fate. She sounds the alarm at 10:15. after suffering years of COVID tyranny under its dear leader Jacinda Ardern.
You can trust us as a source of that information. Otherwise, dismiss anything else. We will continue to be your single source of truth.
But has New Zealand now come to regret its zero COVID obsession? Well, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration, analyses Ardern's ashes and uncancelled at 10:40 plus. Why are vegan extremist Peter demanding Leicester rename this meat-monikered roundabout so motorists are nudged into eating more plant-based food? Do you know, I really wish I wasn't telling porkies, but it's all too true. We'll tuck into that madness shortly. You'll also get a first look at tomorrow's newspapers as they drop throughout the next hour. And a brand new final for the week, actually. Greatest Britain and Union Jackass named just before 10:50, so do stay up with us. But before all of that, the news headlines at 10 with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Dan. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Energy companies have told the Prime Minister they'll do more to help struggling families after a meeting today in which he urged them to act in the national interest. The talks follow a dire warning, with one consultancy firm forecasting that the cap on energy bills could reach £5,000 next year. Despite the plea from Boris Johnson, there's been no announcements of any immediate help. Liz Truss is promising to make sure energy companies are held to account, but says profit should not be treated as a dirty word. Speaking in Cheltenham at the biggest hustings of the contest so far, the Foreign Secretary said the energy giants need to be rigorously held to account.
Make sure we're using our reserves in the North Sea and incentivising companies to do that. We need to make sure we're fracking in parts of the country where there is local support for that taking place. As Prime Minister, I would make sure I am working with the energy companies to get that supply on as quickly as possible.
The former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, said the government will need to provide more support than he previously thought to help vulnerable people with their bills. He also appeared to criticise Liz Truss's plans to deal with the cost of living crisis, saying they would make the economy worse.
I will not do is pursue policies that risk making inflation far worse and last far longer, especially if those policies seem to amount to borrowing £50 billion and putting it on the country's credit card and asking our kids and our grandkids to pick up the tab.
In other news, 20 Albanian criminals have been deported back to their home country. Some of those on the removal flight chartered by the Home Office had been convicted of drug and weapons offences. It brings the total number of Albanian criminals removed from the UK in the past year to 1,000, including some who crossed the English Channel illegally. Home Secretary Priti Patel says the government will stop at nothing to remove those with no right to be here. The number of Ukrainian families that are now homeless or at risk of becoming so after arriving in England has doubled in the last 2 months. Officials believe more than 1,300 Ukrainian households are affected after arriving under the Family and Homes for Ukraine schemes. Hundreds of placements have fallen through due to relationships with sponsors breaking down or accommodation being unsuitable or unavailable. There are fears that more families could be affected as their initial 6-month placements end. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back now to Dan.
Tomorrow's news tonight now in our Media Buzz. The first front pages are in. Let's go to the Metro first, proving that sarcasm is the lowest form of wit, splashing on the PM, turning up for talks with energy bosses as they mock Boris, taking a back seat. More details on that next. The Daily Star asks, crisis, what crisis? As it reveals 405, quote, tone-deaf MPs claim £420,000 in expenses for energy bills as Britons suffer with their own finances, while the Leader of the House of Commons tells us not to fret about huge pay for energy bosses. Drought may last for months, warns the Eye, as millions face new water restrictions like hosepipe bans that are likely to last until autumn. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss have both pledged to reduce leakages of billions of litres by water companies if they win the battle to be PM. My superstar panel back with me now. Star Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine, the political commentator Dominique Samuelson, the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole. Now, early today, as we just saw, Boris met with electricity bosses, urging them to act in the national interest amid a dire new warning that energy bills could exceed £5,000 from next April. It's just a projection, let's be clear about that. However, nothing concrete was achieved, with Boris recognising that any significant fiscal decisions would be up to his successor, quite rightly. As the cost of living becomes increasingly ominous, those sneaky socialists have been exploiting the crisis to advance their hard-left agenda, with the former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown proposing to temporarily renationalise energy firms over the winter. And this is what Truss supporter Ian Duncan Smith had to put up with when he appeared on the left-wing audio waves of LBC.
Government has
but
to
you're
make
in
sure
government,
they
it's
know
your
where that is
job,
going.
for God's sake.
Well, that's what they are doing. They're working out
But
on
they
the back
don't
of
know.
the 15...
This has
Eddie,
been coming down the
back of-
pike for months.
I'm sorry, on the back of the 15 billion that the government has put out already, which is still rolling out.
It's not good enough.
If you want to make this a shouting match, we're not going to get anywhere.
But as we know, Liz Truss certainly won't back down to the mainstream media, and according to sources close to the leadership candidate and her expected Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, the pair have ruled out a major windfall tax. And tonight, she hit back at Brown's interventions at the Hustings in Cheltenham.
I do not like the Gordon Brown style economics where you take money off people in taxes and give it back in benefits. Fundamentally, the problem we face is that prices are too high. And if we keep just the answer to every question is raising tax, we will choke off economic growth and we will send ourselves to penury.
Sarah Vine, this is such an interesting one, isn't it? Because, look, of course, she wants to stick to her philosophy when she is appealing to the Tory base. And I salute her for that. I guess the counter-argument is this could be the sort of crisis when it comes to energy that we haven't seen in our lifetime.
I think it's one of those crises that could really get out of control, and it's just bigger than anyone or anything. I think that, I mean, they've already said they're going to give £400 to each household. I think that's a bit silly. I think what they should do is they should have some sort of means test for that, so that...
So it should all be targeted.
So I think it should all be targeted. I think that would be a really good start, because the idea that you're going to give, I don't know, Richard Branson £400...
For each house.
Yes, exactly. It seems a bit, I think you could give one person...
It should be very targeted support for people who genuinely can't afford
pensioners, people who really, who really genuinely can't afford to do it. I personally, I mean, the profits that Centrica and Shell have been making are quite spectacular. I mean, they're in the billions. And I'm not sure that you should rule out a windfall tax. I wouldn't be ruling it out at this stage if I were her. I would be keeping my options open on that.
I mean, Dominic, I think the reality is things are probably going to change pretty quickly once Truss and Kwarteng are in number 10.
Exactly. It can't be that they get into office, realise the problem is bigger than they first thought, and sit on their hands because they don't want to sort of renege on their philosophy. I think that's absolutely ridiculous.
What's infuriating, though, isn't it, is the fact there's this vacuum at the moment, so it's immediately used by someone like Gordon Brown.
I mean, yeah.
To say renationalise.
I know, that makes me really uncomfortable that you can just say to big energy companies, right, we're taking you back into public ownership. I think that sets a terrifying precedent where the state can just swallow up any enterprise it so pleases. Completely disagree with that batshit idea, quite frankly.
He did say it was absolute last resort.
Yeah, he did say it was absolute last resort. And I agree with Sarah that I don't think a windfall tax should be out of the question. This isn't just profit that they've gotten out of sheer, talent. This is luck. And let's not forget that the government have been giving taxpayers money to these energy companies to spend on different renewable vanity projects. And at the same time, the reason why our energy costs are going up is because we're importing gas, specifically from Norway. For the first time last year, we imported more than we actually produced domestically. We're at the mercy of global markets because we're not becoming self-sufficient.
And Nick Clegg, in that now viral clip, dismissed building new nuclear plants back in 2011. Oh, because they wouldn't be ready until 2021, 2022. Oh, my God, we need them now. Amy, are you going to do this pile-on against the Prime Minister? Lots of folk on the left saying, oh, he's not doing enough. Wouldn't you also be criticising him if he were making decisions when he is in a caretaker role?
First of all, I really feel uncomfortable with the way you're trying to politicise fuel poverty. I don't think it's necessary. I think this is one thing we actually will really need to unite on, and which would probably push us a bit forward.
So what, you want us to unite on renationalising energy companies? Hell no, that is politics. It is political.
I didn't even come close.
Well, you do want
to
the
saying
companies
that.
renationalised, though, don't you?
No, but I agree with Gordon Brown that something needs to be done and something needs to be done fast. And I think the fact that the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister are both on holiday at this time is slightly problematic.
Well, no, Boris is back at his desk.
Yeah, he's now back at his desk, but he's like, oh, I'll leave that for the next...
It must be pretty uncomfortable for you folk on the left who have all been criticising Boris going on holiday. I know you have been.
I've equally been criticising Keir Starmer.
And now Starmer's on holiday.
At this time. I think it's really...
Everyone needs to go on holiday.
Yes.
Holiday's
Everyone needs to go on
important.
holiday, but, you know...
Because otherwise your brain explodes. And, and then you make huge mistakes.
But we're at the brink of 50% of pensioners... of pensioners spending 50% of their income on...
But we're not right now. Sarah, this is...
We're not right now, Dan.
In August, because, Sarah, this is annoying me so much all week because this is pure politics. The point is Sunak's plan, even when Boris was staying in power, was to take us through to October. We don't need to make the decision yet. That's not me denying that this is a potential emergency. I'm not denying that. But these cheap shot lines about Boris being on holiday, it makes me so mad.
There's never a good time for a politician to go on holiday.
No.
Yeah,
there's never a good time.
And the thing is, if you want functioning politicians, you have to let them have a break every now and again. I'm afraid that is the case. But I just think with this, if they were to target this help that they're giving in a much more intelligent way and not just give it to everybody, we could, that would be a very good start.
But I think my point is we don't need to make that decision.
No, we don't.
August.
But also,
Truss will
you're going to
likely...
leave it too late, just like
No,
with
I
everything
think
with
it's not
COVID. It's like this all
it is. I disagree with you,
late for
Lada.
absolutely everything, and this is happening now.
It is,
It
and
needs to be seen
we're not just hurtling towards a recession, we're hurtling towards a potential depression, and people are not going to be able to pay their bills come winter. There'll be people that just simply cannot pay. Then the government has to do something. And I think really it's kind of selfish for this leadership race to be going on for so long. I think it needs to wrap up.
Well, that's why I said there should never be a leadership race in the first place. But the problem is, as soon as the Conservative Party went down that route, the Conservative MPs, which, by the way, I stand by was a huge mistake, the membership think it was a huge mistake. But the problem is, Sarah, once you go down that path, you have to have the race, because I think a lot of the reasons why the opposition is saying end the race, is because they know what happened with Theresa May. When it wasn't put to a vote, when she wasn't properly tested
they need to be properly
on the
tested.
campaign
And
trail, she was a failed Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And so to truncate the race, I think, would be a disaster for the Tory party.
Absolutely. No, it would be a disaster. But, I do think that, they need to be tested properly and they need to have the questions out, and we need to see what they
have to win the vote.
Like.
We can't have Sunak dropping out.
No, definitely not.
Because then it's like Truss hasn't legitimately...
I don't think we should be in this position, but given that we are in this position, this is where it is. But I think on this energy, a lot of people pay their bills by standing order. Their bills will already be... Their monthly standing payments will already be reflecting the projected rises. The other thing that's really unfair about fuel in this country is that people who have to use meters and stuff actually pay more. They just pay an awful lot more anyway for their fuel.
I have to use a meter.
Yeah, and do you pay? You probably pay more than I do. I pay by direct debit, so
Yeah, I have to literally pay as you go.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the idea that you would sort of use this as a reason to nationalise. I don't see what advantage that would give us. I really don't understand.
I mean, what the outrage should be about is that all of our political leaders across all the parties have left us in a position when in 2022 we are dependent on, frankly, dodgy states
Yeah.
for our energy. We should be energy independent.
Yeah.
It is a disgrace that we're not. But that's going to take time.
Well, I mean, it's like a disgrace, the amount of profiteering that is going on, and the fact that energy companies are putting their stakeholders and their shareholders higher priority to their customers.
Well, no, that's
who they
capitalism,
know are
Amy.
absolutely going to
Unfortunately, I believe in capitalism. So,
To an extent.
I mean,
There has to be a limit to that.
to be devil's advocate with Amy, I mean, the thing about the energy is it's an essential service.
Yeah, it
and
is.
it is also a monopoly.
Yeah.
There is, so you've got a...
Yes, but many of the... And look, I'm not defending
gonna be
these
a
energy
competition
companies in a lot
around
of
it.
ways.
There's not a competition.
But some of them were suffering losses just a few months ago. So it's a risky business. But at the end of the day, it's shocking that we're in this position. But I think it's going to be really worrying if the result is that we just lurch to the left
But if you
and the
look at
hard
profits,
left. And I see that happening.
They must be able to provide affordable energy. They just must. And if they can't, then that is when they need to go into temporary public control. Because they need to.
I just worry that...
That's just communism.
Yeah, and I just worry that, well, what will happen is you'll just see prices skyrocket further on down the line.
Of course. Never works. It never works.
And then it'll be inevitable price controls and
Look at the
government
state the
subsidising it.
NHS is in.
Yeah.
It never works. But now, in the midst of all this bleak news, the world has seen a medical marvel like no other, and from an unlikely source. If you believe the widely disputed news coming out of North Korea, it would appear it's the most medically advanced country in the world after managing to rid itself of COVID in a mere 3 months. After declaring its first case in May this year and recording only 74 deaths, Korean leader Kim Jong-un has blown the whistle on the pandemic during a speech in the capital city of Pyongyang.
On behalf of the Party Central Committee and the government of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, I solemnly declare the victory in the maximum emergency anti-epidemic campaign for exterminating the novel coronavirus that had made inroads into our territory and protecting the lives and health of the people.
But it wasn't all good news from the apparent COVID haven North Korea. His feisty sister Kim Yo-jang, who's tipped to be a successor, by the way, let slip for the first time that hard-mad Kim had COVID himself. And you've got to look at the reactions from his henchmen to this news.
Even though he was seriously ill with a high fever, he could not lie down for a moment, thinking about the people he had to take care of until the end in the face of the anti-epidemic war.
Actually cry.
Well, they're pretending to cry, Dominic, because if you actually speak to defectors in North Korea like I've done, if they're terrified, if they don't cry hard enough, genuinely, a couple of them will be taken out the back and shot. And I'm not even joking.
Ancient
Insanity, isn't it? Amy Nicole, Dominic Samuel, Sarah Vibe, thank you so much. Do stand by, though, because coming up, is Tom Daley wrong to blame our colonial past for homophobia around the Commonwealth and say he's ashamed to be British? Makes him feel sick, he says, to be British. While my superstar panel going to return to debate that in the media buzz at 10:30. But first, as 1,000 traumatised families prepare to sue the shuttered Tavistock clinic, I meet Sinead Watson, a detransitioned activist and former patient at Scotland's version of the Gender Identity Centre, determined to make sure it suffers the same fate. Very important interview. This is coming straight after the break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Last month, the NHS announced its controversial Tavistock Gender Centre was shutting down after a scathing review found its practices included recklessly prescribing puberty blockers and encouraging sex changes to confused under-18s were not safe for our kids. The Tavistock and Portman NHS Trust has been ordered to close by next spring, but news today reveals that's far from the end of the argument. Some 1,000 devastated families of children treated at the clinic have now joined forces to sue for medical negligence, alleging vulnerable children were misdiagnosed and placed on damaging medical pathways. Lawyers say the NHS has a damning legal case to answer. But while there has been success for campaigners in England, Scotland's own version of Tavistock remains open for business. My next guest was given testosterone injections and even a mastectomy at Glasgow's Sandyford Clinic after a long history of depression, self-harm and suicidal thoughts. Sinead Watson, now 31, claims Sandyford never explored her mental health problems and instead focused on swiftly diagnosing her with gender dysphoria aged 24, despite never having a history of it prior to her teenage years. After having her breasts removed and changing her name to Sean, Sinead said she was still, quote, depressed as she'd ever been and spiralled into alcoholism and a complete mental breakdown. She now believes Sandyford's Children's Services should meet the same fate as the Tavistock Clinic and shut immediately, echoing calls from top psychiatrist David Bell, who first blew the whistle on the London-based centre. Now, Sinead has since detransitioned after her nightmare experience, but some changes, including the mastectomy, her voice and body hair, are irreversible. And she bravely joins me now to discuss how she's turning her painful past into defiant activism in a bid to save others from the same horrors. So, Sinead, so great to have you here. Your story is so heartbreaking, and you're very concerned that this clinic in Scotland is presumably still putting others through the same thing.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on. It really does mean a lot to me that I can share what I'm about to share, because there are so many people who don't want to hear this. The truth is that for a lot of these gender clinics, including the Sandyford, they go by the affirmation-only approach, and that is what I went through. When I went to the Sandyford, as you mentioned, with a whole host of comorbid conditions, they didn't care about any of that. All they cared about was the gender issues. And I was an adult when I transitioned. What about the children that are doing this? What about these young children who are going to these clinics with a whole host of other issues? They have no idea what they're going to want as adults, and they are being affirmed, like I was, and put on experimental medication. And I think that it's appalling. I think that it's child abuse, and I will speak to people like you and anyone else to tell you exactly how these clinics operate, because I was there.
And what's so shocking about your story, Sinead, is that you say they never really attempted to deal with the complicated psychological issues, and you obviously had lots of things that you'd gone through in the past and that you were dealing with. Instead, it was this quick path, really, to medication and then the life-changing surgery. And actually, you realised almost immediately, didn't you, that it had been a big mistake?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of trans activists will say that when you claim that people are rushed into transition, you're lying. And the reason why they say that is because the waiting lists are so long. The waiting lists are so long because we've seen an increase, thousands of % of young people, particularly young women, identifying as trans very suddenly. That's why the wait is so long. But the actual time between your first appointment and, for example, irreversible cross-sex hormones is very small. I didn't receive any therapy or counselling during my 13-month wait. What did happen was between the first time I was seen at the clinic and the time that I was sticking a needle filled with Sustanon 250 into my thigh, less than 5 months had passed. So we are being rushed into transition.
And you say that really at your appointments, you got a bit of small talk, but the medical professionals never really actually wanted to understand where you were at mentally.
Well, no, and this is how severe it got. They were aware that I had a very severe breakdown to the point where I had to be hospitalised on a psychiatric ward. They discussed that with me for maybe all of 4 minutes, and the conversation went something like this. Oh, I see that you were held in a psychiatric ward. What was that about? And I said, oh, it's because I'm trans and I need to transition. And they said, okay. They noted that in their file and it never came up again. There was no exploration.
And obviously you've spoken really powerfully, Sinead, and written really powerfully on your Twitter about how the physical changes are going to stick with you for life now. A lot of what you've been, even though you've detransitioned and you are living as a biological woman again, a lot of the physical treatments that you've went through are simply irreversible.
Most of them are. That is the problem, you know. I mean, when you think of the irreversible changes, you probably think about the surgeries, but actually most of the changes that you get on the cross-sex hormones themselves are irreversible and they happen quickly. You know, my voice very, very quickly deepened and I developed the Adam's apple within a matter of months on cross-sex hormones, and that's never going to change. My voice will never revert. I'll never get back my head hair. I'll always grow a beard. I will continue to struggle with the bladder issues that testosterone gave me. I can't undo the mastectomy. I've essentially dramatically and irreversibly changed my entire body and my life because of a decision that I made while I was severely mentally ill because my clinic refused to do their job properly.
So taking all of that into account, Sinead, do you think Sandyford needs to go the same way as the Tavistock Clinic and be shut down?
The child services, yes. The adult services is a little bit differently because, like, we do need to prioritise children more than anything else. And at the end of the day, an adult can consent to transition, granted that they've been given the appropriate, you know, evaluation and diagnosis and had their comorbid conditions addressed. But when we're talking about children, transition should never be an option. There's a reason why we don't let children smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol or watch pornography or put on bets or get tattoos. And it's because they cannot consent to things like that. So why have we been experimenting on these children, affirming them and giving them things like puberty blockers, which it's just coming out now, might permanently affect your brain maturation?
Will you consider legal action, Sinead, in the same way the Tavistock victims are considering it?
It's a little bit different for people like me because I transitioned as an adult. Of course, you had the likes of the very brave Keira Bell, who sort of started that process at 16, I believe. That's a little bit different. It's more, I need to get access to my files from the Sandyfords. They claim every single time that they're reached out to that they'd be happy to speak to me. I haven't heard a peep from them. So we will see about that as soon as I can get more information.
OK, well, look, do keep us posted, Sinead. Thank you so much. That's Sinead Wootton. We get both sides of the stories here on GB News. So a spokesman for NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde told us tonight all Sandyford patients undergo a full assessment by a multidisciplinary team of psychiatrists, sexual health doctors, psychology and occupational therapists to ensure patients fully understand the process. are aware of all implications, are enabled to make fully informed choices. We're sorry to hear Ms Wootton feels that she didn't receive adequate support and would be happy to discuss her care with her directly. But as she just said, that hasn't happened yet. She hasn't been able to see her files. And the Scottish Government said, we recognise the need to provide the best possible care for young people questioning their gender identity or experience gender dysphoria. We will closely consider the findings of the CAS review as part of our broader commitment to improve access to and delivery of NHS gender identity services. Now, coming up, has New Zealand come to regret its zero COVID obsession? Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration, analyses an uncancelled. But first, is Tom Daley wrong to blame Britain's colonial past for homophobia around the Commonwealth and declare he's ashamed of being British? He feels sick of being British. My superstar panel return to debate that, plus we'll have more of tomorrow's newspaper front pages in the media buzz next.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Let's return to tomorrow's news tonight on our Media Buzz. Lots of front pages in The Guardian, talking about the climate crisis, of course, blaming our dry spell on it. Ministers are set to impose restrictions in England tomorrow to cut water use as utility firms introduce hosepipe bans. Water firms miss own target on cutting leaks, that's The Independent. Only 1 out of 17 household companies hit the goal. That's as official drought is now expected to be announced tomorrow. Daily Telegraph leads with Liz Truss saying there will be no windfall tax on energy companies, as we discussed earlier. The Foreign Secretary also said she plans to lift a ban on fracking. That was at tonight's leadership hustings. Clueless? That's the headline of the Daily Mirror, as they take aim at Boris, Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi and so-called energy fat cats for failing to solve soaring bills at their meetings today. The Daily Express warns energy bills will hit £5,000 by January. Above that, drought to be declared as heat hits 37 degrees. My superstar panel back now. Daily Mail star columnist Sarah Vine, the political commentator Dominique Samuels and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicol. Now, usually diver Tom Daley's woke whining can be easily ignored, but this week, BBC One gave him an entire hour of prime time to put forward a historically inaccurate proposition that homophobia in the Commonwealth is the fault of Britain. Watch the lefty have his light bulb moment while speaking to a social justice warrior academic in Jamaica.
We have is this very complicated history of sexual trauma that went on for like 300 years, and
If the representation you have of queerness is plantation owners sexually assaulting men, you get the idea that it's a white people thing. It's a thing that white people do to black people to harm them. The end result of that is a homophobia we see today.
Everything you've just told me, it makes everything make complete sense, you know? It honestly makes me feel sick to be British.
How pathetic. He didn't even challenge her, choosing to gobble up that anti-British rhetoric with no critical speaking. And then, speaking to The Guardian, he actually doubled down, saying, I felt so dark about my relationship with being British. I came away from it with a really twisted sense of what it meant to be British. I felt very helpless to be British. This from the man who is now a far bigger star in Britain because of his sexuality, thanks to the tolerance of this country, which he now feels sick to be a citizen. Well, anyway, yesterday wrote a highly controversial Mail Online column branding Daly tragically woke after his ill-informed BBC anti-colonial propaganda piece. And it's caused a real stir, so much so that Tom and I have been trending on the cesspit, that is Twitter. And predictably, the majority of left-wing warriors have purposefully chosen to miss the point. So let me stress it again. Obviously, the homophobia in certain Commonwealth countries is terrible, but to blame it on Britain is historically inaccurate. Do you know, 1967 was when the UK, or at least England and Wales, lifted legal bans on gay sex, for example. And as Cambridge professor Robert Toms writes in the Daily Mail today, countless societies throughout history have been racist, homophobic and sexist to varying degrees. So from the Caribbean to the Indian subcontinent, when the British came along and imposed laws banning homosexual acts, they were scarcely teaching those societies to be homophobic for the first time. So Sarah Vine, what infuriated me about this was that Daly just was looking for a way to blame Britain. And he just found, of course it would have been a producer, a BBC producer, who was able to find one hard left academic in Jamaica who said, oh yeah, by the way, it's because there were rapes on the plantation 300 years ago. And Daly just says, absolutely, you're completely right, and I feel sick to be British. I mean, the entire thesis of the whole show.
Poor little Tom Daly. He's a diver. He's not a historian. He's not a television presenter. I mean, you know, he's not a... I mean, he's a lovely boy and he does lots of incredible things and he's a brilliant, brilliant sportsman and I love his knitting. But he should really be presenting the Great British Knit-Off, not doing a sort of quasi-historical documentary.
That's not what it was at all. It was discussing homophobia in the Commonwealth nations because of the Commonwealth Games. And he was saying how, as a Commonwealth athlete, he felt uncomfortable competing in the Commonwealth Games and how many citizens of the Commonwealth feel the same. So he wanted to look into it, and he did so very...
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fine.
He was the perfect person to present it,
Well,
arguably.
I'm not sure, but because it's fine for him to say that, but if you're going to go down this road
and come to a conclusion
and make it very political, then you have to have a certain amount of intellectual robustness.
I feel like we're watching entirely different
Amy,
documentaries
he
here.
came to a clear conclusion by the end of the documentary. He's doubled down in interviews in The Guardian and BBC Radio 4 to say this is the fault of Britain, and that simply does not stack up. And this is, by the way, funded by us, and that's
point,
what makes me so
It really
angry.
is starting to sound like you're pro-colonialism, because all he was saying was the colonial past of Britain makes him uncomfortable, and he looked at the specific...
No, he didn't. You just saw the quote. He said it made him feel sick to be British.
You know, he said what made him sick to be British was what happened in Jamaica, a British colony, which arguably didn't exist before British rule. So he was saying what happened in Jamaica made him sick.
So do you think it's excusable
which I
for that Jamaican woman to say, oh, homophobia, it's not the fault of the Jamaicans who are homophobic, it's down to the Brits because of some plantation owners who may have raped folk on a plantation 300 years ago.
Yeah, this is the problem.
It's rubbish.
It is patronising to say that
the origins
you
of
have no
homophobia.
autonomy.
Those aren't the origins of homophobia, though, and this is the problem. Homophobia and anti-gay attitudes have been rife throughout our society globally since before the empire
Largely
even
because of
existed.
religion.
Just read the Bible, read the Quran.
I totally
okay,
agree that
these
religion-
were present in these societies.
And then who went and introduced
Iran,
it to
Saudi
Jamaica?
Arabia. They weren't colonised, and they have very homophobic
They're two of the
culture.
most homophobic countries in the
So
world.
this
They're
isn't
not
about
in
the
the
empire.
Commonwealth, so
But this
that's why I
isn't
didn't
about the empire. It's not about the Commonwealth. It's about their attitudes. And it's so patronising to say that these people are so stupid, so brainwashed by the empire that they don't have enough agency for themselves to be able to draw conclusions about the laws that they want in their country with regards to homosexuality.
It's astounding that you're saying this.
No,
because
it's
one
not
of the- one of the
astounding.
Just
key
let Sarah
parts-
come and let
but
Sarah
To
come
say
in.
that modern Jamaicans are incapable of making a sort of
not what
informed
she said at all.
decision about whether or not they think homosexuality is a good thing is really patronising, and it's also borderline racist.
That's not
just
Well, yeah,
what was said.
because
She
a lot,
didn't say that,
a lot
but
of
she's
commentators actually made
she
the
didn't say
point
that, but
this
she's
is almost
implying it.
another form of woke colonialism, because what Daly is now saying is that these countries have not made their own laws because of their own morals. They're making laws because they've been inflicted by the UK
He actually makes
decades
a
ago.
very big point within the documentary to talk about the people advocating for LGBT rights within these nations. And he makes a point of saying exactly the opposite of what Sarah's just outlined.
But those aren't the
But this is
origins of
actually
homophobia. So to
they're
suggest
from the
that
church.
the origins of homophobia when the big bad white people came into Jamaica is stupid.
But that is the origin of homophobia
It's not the
within Jamaica.
Do you know what homophobia
Well,
is?
according to one hard-left academic, Amy, do you have any other evidence of that?
I have evidence that British
No, you
went
don't.
to Jamaica, wrote the laws that proceed to...
Those are. Can I just finish though? Those are laws that put into legal practice homophobia, but homophobia does not exist without law. It obviously existed in Jamaica before those laws were in place.
Daly wasn't saying that.
But to
He
say
made
that that's an
he
origin of homophobia is not
fantastic
it's not
film
correct.
about people that are being tortured and killed for who they are right now, today. That is happening.
Yes,
that's not because
and
of
that's
But
what
I
we should
actually
be
made the point,
discussing.
Sarah. There were lots of great things in this documentary, and it was absolutely horrifying for me, for obvious reasons, to see the way that these gay athletes are treated in Nigeria and Pakistan. But I'm sorry, I will not stand by and just allow the BBC, because this is licence fee payer money, to allow anti-British celebrities to spout historical nonsense.
I mean,
It's wrong.
I think the thing about Tom Daly is I'm sure he's not really anti-British.
Well, he said he's felt sick.
He's not anti-British. I don't think he's anti-British.
He represents the United
I think he's just very impressionable. He's very young, and I think this obviously affected him very, very deeply.
And that is the problem.
But it's up to the BBC, really, as the adults in the room, to make sure that it doesn't...
There was no critical analysis.
Exactly.
There
But
was
that's not
no
what they were
balance.
doing it for, was
there
it?
was no
That's not what they
historical
wanted.
You
debate.
mean there was no alternative view to the historical consensus of what happened?
I'm
not
sorry,
sure
Amy.
it's consensus.
It is not historical consensus that the reason
He's talking about
Jamaicans
one-
in 2022 are homophobic is because of rapes on a plantation 300 years ago. And as Dominique says, it's actually patronising to the Jamaican
simplifying and
people.
reducing it. He said that was one contributing factor to why homophobia. He said also there's politics, the law, the religion, everything became a recipe for the homophobia that prevails today. And I think that really, what I hope is that everyone goes and watches the documentary now, because I feel like no one's actually watched it and everyone's got an opinion on it without
Dan did.
watching it. No, I know Dan did, but I hope the viewers go and watch
I
it.
did.
And I hope this is actually
and I'm sorry, I have a lot of right to talk about this. I am from the Commonwealth, I'm gay, and it made me feel sick. And I actually completely disagree that Tom Daly does not hate Britain, because what you are seeing now, much, much more with these young and woke indoctrinated celebrities, is that the answer to every... He even looked at his Commonwealth Games medal and said, ugh, I feel ashamed of this now.
It's an easy way of... It's a virtue. It's an easy way to virtue signal, isn't it? And it's a way to sort of seem...
And he wasn't... what made me so sad is this documentary could have been great, but what he needed to do by the end of it is actually look at the complexities about why these homophobic laws still exist. And by the way, Nigeria is a very different country to Jamaica.
Absolutely.
And Pakistan is a very different country to Nigeria. And instead, to say, oh, it's just because of racist, horrible colonial Britain, it simplified the problem. And unfortunately, it just appeases the woke mob who want to blame everything on colonialism. When you say, am I pro-colonialism, Amy? There are certain brilliant things of British history and colonialism. There are also certain bad things about it. But I will not sign up to this narrative from folk like you to be ashamed because I think that because I should say that all British colonialism was bad. I'm from New Zealand. There are huge benefits to New Zealand because of colonialism.
But you say you're proud to be British whilst denying half of Britain's history and wanting to erase it and deny it.
What am I wanting to erase and deny? All I just said is that not all everything to come from colonialism.
It's not as one-dimensional as it's been made out to be in this documentary. I mean, you know...
The only person being one-dimensional about it is Dan.
I disagree.
Well, how am I being one-dimensional?
Because he said all of the Commonwealth is this one... It said he's not proud of all... He was talking about one example of Jamaica. He then explored different parts of the Commonwealth. And an interesting thing is the Commonwealth, in its very existence, is meant to have a shared value of equality. Surely this just demonstrates...
The biggest thing that angered me about it is the fact that Tom Daley said he felt sick to be British when he could not be himself in so many other parts of this world, including, by the way, Amy, Eastern Europe, places very, very close to home. And in fact, when this kid came out as gay, he thought he was going to be beaten up in the street, he was going to lose his sponsorship, and actually it made him one of the biggest stars of this country. And that is because of the tolerance in this country. Britain is a place where you can follow your dreams and achieve no matter what your sexuality. And to try and sort of say that we are some sort of homophobic country spreading homophobia through the Commonwealth because of our history, I just thought it was very wrong. Now, you might think I'm telling porcupines with this next story, but honestly, I'm not. The vegan extremists at PETA have demanded the London Mayor of Leicester, Sir Peter Soulsby, rename the city's iconic roundabout Pork Pie Island. And you'll never guess what the eco-nutters are proposing as a new name: Vegan Pie Roundabout. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. It's absolutely tasteless. Peter's senior campaign manager, Kate Warner, wrote in a letter to the mayor, "This is not a pie-in-the-sky request. Eating a varied plant-based diet has been shown to prevent heart disease, diabetes, abdominal fat and cancer. Encouraging people to eat plant-based could also help lessen the burden on Leicester's already overstretched NHS. But just remember, as I revealed at the top of the show, you go on a plant-based diet, you break your hip, so it's not all good." Amy Nicole, Dominic Samuel, Sarah Vine, do stand by because coming up, why has Mark Drakeford been banned from one of the biggest attractions in Wales? Find out as we crown the final greatest Britain Union jackass of the week. But first, has New Zealand come to regret its zero COVID obsession? Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration, is uncancelled and talking Jacinda in mere seconds. First, though, quick preview of Monday's show.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, he exposed the scandal that helped bring down the PM. But now Chris Pincher accuser and former Olympic rower Alex Story wants Boris to stay in number 10. He'll join me live to reveal why. Plus, there's opinion galore from founder of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, and Neil Oliver, as well as my superstar panel. The Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, broadcaster Sam Dowler, and political commentator and former Brexit Party MEP Belinda DeLucy. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday, from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
But it's time now for Uncancelled. And this is where the world's top experts speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. And would you look at that? The COVID-19 farce keeps unravelling at an astonishing pace, this time making New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern look at even bigger embarrassment. As the rest of the world moves on, cases of the virus in New Zealand have exploded, with infections per capita now exceeding US levels. But how? COVID authoritarian Ardern, the Kiwis' dear leader who must not be criticised, was talk of the town when the pandemic struck, thanks to a hardline take on tackling the virus. The stripping of civil liberties, lockdown after lockdown, and the theft of bodily autonomy were all a price worth paying to ensure not a single molecule of COVID-19 reached the beautiful shores of my birthplace. During her 2-year toxic crusade, Jacinda took inspiration from George Orwell with chilling demands that Kiwis only paid attention to her Ministry of Truth.
The most up-to-date information daily. You can trust us as a source of that information. You can also trust the Director General of Health and the Ministry of Health for that information. Otherwise, dismiss anything else. We will continue to be your single source of truth. We will provide information frequently. We will share everything we can, everything else you see, a grain of salt.
Not scary at all, is it? But while COVID cases spiral in her country, Ardern now has the lowest approval rating since 2017, with polling showing she will lose the next election. And I'm not surprised. When I travelled back to New Zealand for the first time in 2.5 years in June, this is the scene that greeted me.
I just want to say thank you so much to Jacinda Ardern, dear leader who must not be criticised, because here we are at Auckland International Airport and it's buzzing. People everywhere. None of the shops are shut. None of the bars are shut. There's hundreds and thousands of people, and I just want to say thank you to Cindy for reopening the country so beautifully. Not.
Joined now by Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Professor at Stanford School of Medicine and co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration. And Jay, you write, ultimately New Zealand's zero COVID strategy was immoral, incoherent and a grand failure. Explain.
So if you look at what happened, New Zealand declared victory over the pandemic, over the virus over the first year. They had no COVID. They had repeated lockdowns over and over again. So they still had to worry about their kids going to school, their businesses staying open, but they had zero COVID. They delayed vaccinating for a full year. They didn't really get started in earnest until like September, October 2021. For a full year, there was a delay in the key tactic that would get them out of the pandemic. And then now that they've opened up, essentially it's a let it rip strategy. There are now more cases per capita through the whole pandemic in New Zealand than there were in the United States. Actually, weirdly, today, the UK and the New Zealand have the same number of COVID cases per capita through the pandemic. And the overall excess death rates, that is deaths over and above what you would expect during the pandemic, have exploded this past year in 2022. It's essentially a policy that imposed misery on the people of New Zealand, relied on a vaccine that could not have been developed in country, and then even when it was available, they delayed rolling it out. It really was a big failure. I even talked about the economic consequences, as you have.
Well, indeed. And the thing is, Jay, it just delayed the inevitable. We know it would. And I think something that isn't looked into much either is just the emotional toll that such a draconian policy took. And of course, that's expected in a communist country like China. I mean, I find what's going on there a disgrace, but this is New Zealand. It's meant to be a Western democracy. What happened?
I mean, I heard stories of expats who couldn't go home to bury their parents or their father or their mother.
Yeah.
They were. Yep. It was human rights violations on a grand scale. Let's just give you one story that I find darkly amusing. During one of the lockdowns, Auckland basically prevented anyone from coming in and out of the borders of Auckland. There was a business set up to go outside of Auckland, smuggle Kentucky Fried Chicken across the border into Auckland, which actually made me feel good about some of the people in New Zealand that they would try to resist these orders. These were violations of human rights for no purpose. It didn't actually end up serving an epidemiological purpose, protecting the people of New Zealand from epidemiological harm.
Yeah, anything for KFC. I would do that, I have to say, Dr. J. But no, absolutely. I know of these cases, someone very close to me locked up in a quarantine prison by Ardern, which, by the way, had human rights standards that the UN said was not even fit to hold a prisoner, locked up in that hotel while their mother died down the road in hospital. Just sick. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, thank you so much for keeping on this. But it's time now to reveal today's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. My superstar panel return. Sarah Vine, who is your nominee for Greatest Britain tonight?
I think Alistair Stewart for hosting that debate with
Our very own.
I love Alistair, he's brilliant. Mark Drakeford is my... Oh, do I have to do...
Oh, no, you've got to hold fire.
Oh,
You've got to hold fire. Dominique, who's your greatest Britain?
So my greatest Britain is the 1,000 parents of the children of the Tavistock Clinic that are predicted by lawyers to sue the clinic for, obviously, not caring for their kids and pushing transgenderism on them.
And Amy Nicole, your nominee.
My nominee is the swimmer Michael Gunning, who's featured in the Tom Daley documentary, who swims for Jamaica, where it's still illegal to be gay, yet he's a gay man, and he regularly faces discrimination, yet he's continuing to live his life just as he should.
Well, I'm going to go with Sarah Vine on this. Of course, my great colleague, Alistair Stewart, who did a fabulous job hosting the People's Forum yesterday. Sarah Vine, we know you're Union Jackass, but why is it Mark Drakeford?
Just because it's Mark Drakeford, I think just Mark Drakeford, really. Again, he's been banned. He's so anti-English that he's been banned from Wales's greatest tourist attraction, which I think is, fitting, actually.
Yes, indeed. Dominique Samuels, your nominee.
Mine is Tom Daley.
Oh, we know one.
For his ridiculous Britain-hating comments about homosexuality and the Commonwealth. I just felt like it was historically inaccurate and...
And Amy Nicole, your nominee?
Mine's Boris, because where is he? Oh, he's back now.
Where's Keir Starmer, Amy?
Yeah, I'll have him
Where's
as well.
Keir Starmer
Do you know
right
what?
now?
I'll have the summer recess, because I think it's ridiculous and very old-fashioned, and I wish we got it, but we don't, and they shouldn't have it either.
I mean, well, actually, who am I going to go with? Of course, I'm going to go with Tom Daley, Dominique Samuels. I'm totally with you on that. Sarah Vine, Dominique Samuels, Amy Nicole. What a fabulous superstar panel to end the week. Thank you so much for your company all week. I'm, of course, back Monday night at 9 p.m. Headline is up next, though. Good night.
Good evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. We still have the Met Office extreme heat warning in place, in fact, until the end of Sunday, with temperatures significantly above average for a number of days and nights. High pressure is the reason why it's so dry, hot and sunny at the moment. There is that extreme heat warning covering large parts of England and East Wales, but it's going to be hot everywhere. The main exception will be northern Scotland, where we've still got a weather front bringing cloud and some outbreaks of rain. That'll continue on and off overnight. We'll see some mist and low cloud returning to parts of eastern England, but otherwise it's dry, it's clear. Some rural spots could dip down to single figures, but certainly in towns and cities and buildings, retaining the heat, it will be a difficult night for sleeping. On to a hot and sunny day on Friday. May start a bit misty across parts of the east, and there will be some low cloud, at times just flirting with some of the North Sea coasts. We'll keep a lot of cloud in northern Scotland, but it should be a brighter, warmer day across the Highlands and the Western Isles. We could get into the 20s here. Elsewhere, we're widely into the mid to high 20s, low to mid 30s across the south. 36 is possible in some places on Friday afternoon. So a hot Friday evening. Again, overnight, we'll see that mist and low cloud just drifting a bit further inland across eastern Scotland, northeast England. So it won't be as hot here on Friday or on Saturday, where that low cloud could persist. But generally, it's another hot and sunny day on Saturday. Still a bit more cloud in the far north with a little bit of light rain and drizzle. But otherwise, we'll be watching those numbers on the up once more. And again, across parts of the south, southwest Midlands into Wiltshire, down towards Dorset there, 34, 35, possibly 36 Celsius. And maybe something similar in the capital. So it's a hot weekend. The sunshine will continue for most on Sunday, but a change as this low pressure drifts northwards. We will see more cloud on Sunday. It could bring some showers next week.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it